Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the most important speed tiers in Regulation H. Now, before we jump into it, there are a couple of things I want to briefly touch on here. The first part here is understanding the speed tiers and essentially what I'll be talking about today. So, when referring to maximum speed on a Pokemon, that is where they have 31 IVs in their speed stat, 252 EVs in their speed stat, and a positive nature. These are things like timid and, jolly, for example. The mid-speed tier is not something we'll really touch on today, but this is essentially just perfect speed with no investment at all. And then minimum speed is commonly seen in Trick Room. These are things like 0 IVs and 0 EVs, paired up with a nature that reduces the speed, things like the brave nature and the calm nature. So some important notes here as well, speed ties. When two Pokemon have the same speed stat, all interactions have a 50% chance for either Pokemon to go first. So essentially, two max speed Dragapults clicking Dragon Darts, it's just the coin flip, right? Ways to figure out who is faster. I've got here abilities will proc in speed order. This is very good to know for things like Rillaboom versus Indeedee. These are Pokemon with the same speed stat. Whoever is faster of the two, if there is one that is faster, their terrain will go first. For example, if I send out my Rillaboom, my grassy terrain goes up, but then Indeedee's psychic terrain overrides it. More than likely, the Rillaboom is faster. Very similar as well with Pokemon like Incineroar. If you both lead Incineroar, whoever's Intimidate goes first will be the faster Incineroar. Ways to increase the speed, which we'll also touch on briefly after this as well. These include things like Tailwind, some abilities, Choice Scarf, setup moves, and Trick Room, right? Another thing as well is VGC is played at level 50. That's very important for the numbers we'll look at today. Obviously, in singles, they tend to play with level 100, and because of that, the numbers will look a bit different to what I have today. Another one, Electrode is Fiction. Now, Electrode is technically the fastest Pokemon in the game, but I expect to see Electrode see no play. Therefore, we will touch on a different Pokemon as the fastest Pokemon in the game. Just wanted to put that out there. Max speed isn't common on most Pokemon right now. It is, very uncommon right now for a majority of Pokemon to run max speed, except for a select few, and we'll kind of touch on those at the start of the video. And I will only touch on Pokemon I deem to be meta threats. There are going to be plenty of fast Pokemon out there that are pretty bad. Electrode is a perfect example, right? Where Electrode technically is faster than everything on this list. We're not going to talk about Electrode because I don't think Electrode is very good. Now, different ways to increase your speed. These are things like Tailwind. Tailwind will double your Pokemon's speed when in Tailwind. Weather abilities. These are abilities like Chlorophyll, Swift Swim, Slush Rush, and Sand Rush, all of which double your speed when they are in their respective weather. Choice Scarf is a held item that will increase your speed by 1.5 times. Setup moves like Dragon Dance will increase your speed by 1.5 times as well. Agility is another setup move that will double your speed. And then Trick Room will reverse the turn order. Basically, it'll make your Torkoal go first instead of last. Dragapult is the fastest Pokemon in the game, hitting 213 speed at max, but it is very common for it to run an Adamant Nature, hitting 194. To outspeed this Pokemon in Tailwind, you should aim for 107 speed, and to outspeed it at +1, again, this is things like Choice Scarf and Dragon Dance, you will need 143 speed. Talonflame is the next fastest threat in the metagame, hitting a maximum of 195, making this Pokemon really the only thing that outspeeds a Adamant Dragapult. It is also the fastest priority Tailwind setter in the game, thanks to its ability Gale Wings. And its flying type moves, again, thanks to Gale Wings, basically have priority at full HP. This allows things like its Brave Birds to go before, Whimsicott's Tailwinds, for example, which is very important. To outspeed this Pokemon in Tailwind, you only need 98 speed, and to outspeed it at +1, you will need 131. Meowscarada, another very fast threat right now, hitting a max speed of 192, but it is very common for this Pokemon to run an Adamant Nature, hitting 175. To outspeed this Pokemon in Tailwind, you need 97 speed, and to outspeed it at +1, you need 129. Now, Whimsicott, again, another premier Tailwind setter at max speed with Timid Nature. This Pokemon will hit 184. To outspeed it in Tailwind, you need 93, but it is very important to know that Whimsicott is one of the premier Tailwind setters in the game, and it will likely set Tailwind for itself, so keep that in mind. Because of that, I really do not think this is a Pokemon worth speed creeping unless you are something like a Talonflame, which can be very important because, again, if your Talonflame is faster than Whimsicott with a Jolly Nature, you can Brave Bird it before it can Tailwind, which is very important to know. And Whimsicott's Speed Wars can be pretty important as well, which is another reason to run max speed on this Pokemon. Basically allowing you to taunt the opposing Whimsicott before they can get off their Tailwind is very, very important. Maushold is another pretty fast threat and will hit a max speed of 179. So in Tailwind, you only need 90 speed to outspeed it. This can be pretty important as well because a lot of the time people will run things like Incineroar in Tailwind and they will want to Parting Shot out. But if their Incineroar is not 90 speed or faster, Maushold can potentially just outspeed it and click Taunt, which is very important to keep in mind. And also at +1, you will need to hit 120 speed to outspeed it. Now, these Pokemon here are all the common weather abusers. Now, For the most part, these Pokemon tend to run attack boosting natures, but I have put, timid and whatnot there for when I do think there is a chance that they'll run a different nature. Hisuian Lilligant is one of the premier, chlorophyll users right now, one of the better grass types on the Sun teams. It is very common for this Pokemon to hit Adamant Nature, hitting 157, holding a Focus Sash. Jumpluff is another, not super common one, but one I do expect to see pick up a little bit in Sun. With a Timid Nature, it hits 178. This Pokemon tends to always run Timid because it wants to outspeed and sleep everything. Venusaur has two different modes. One is the Modest mode, which will hit 132. This is very good for allowing it to, basically outspeed a lot of things and hit really hard. With Timid, 145, we can make it that little bit faster, which will enable you to, click things like Sleep Powder, right? Lycanroc, for the most part, will almost always run an Adamant Nature, hitting 164. This is because it's a very frail Pokemon that's pretty quick naturally and tends to like running the Focus Sash item. Excadrill is more commonly than not, runs Adamant, hitting 140, but occasionally we will see it hit 154 with a Jolly Nature. Basculegion, this is a Pokemon that will almost always run an Adamant Nature, hitting 130. That's because this Pokemon doesn't really hit that hard, at least on a Swift Swim set, without the Adamant Nature. And Overquill is a fast enough Pokemon where, with an Adamant Nature hitting 137, it does most of the stuff it really needs to. And something notable as well is Slush Rush just isn't good right now. None of the users are really that good. Maybe I could have put Satitan on this list, but I didn't really think it was worth it. So some potential threats to watch out for. Now, these Pokemon are not anything crazy in my opinion, but potentially could see some results here. So Jolteon max speed hits 200, would make it the second fastest Pokemon in the metagame. In Tailwind, you need 101 to outspeed. Kilowatt Roll is another pretty quick Pokemon, hits 194, which I believe is 1 point less than our good friend Talonflame. To outspeed it, you need 98. Sneasler, now this Pokemon is definitely one that maybe should have got its own slide, but with Unburdened, Sneasler has the potential to be the fastest Pokemon in the game, especially when paired up with things like Psychic Seed and Grassy Seed as well. But yeah, max speed will hit 189, and as I said, it's an Unburdened abuser. Basically, when Unburdened is activated, which is when a Pokemon consumes its item, its speed will be doubled, so definitely keep that in mind. And I've got Hisuian Zoroark here, but it really represents all the base 110 Pokemon. Its max speed is 178. You'll only need 90 speed to outspeed it in Tailwind, 120 at +1. But as I've said here at the bottom, and you can see my beautiful spelling mistake, I wouldn't recommend trying to specifically outspeed any of these Pokemon, right? If you're going to try to outspeed Jolteon, you may as well outspeed Dragapult. If you're going to try to outspeed Kilowattrel, you may as well outspeed Talonflame. If you're going to try to... don't try to outspeed Hisuian Sneasler, sorry. Because if this thing's Unburdened, you're never going to do it. And base 110s, if you're going to try outspeed them, just outspeed Maushold. That's kind of the gist of that of this section here. We have the 100 to 102 base speed tier now. I'm mainly just going to speak about the 102 here because this is Garchomp. Basically, again, kind of similar to what we we're just touching on there. If you're going to try to outspeed the base 100s, you may as well outspeed the base 102s as well, in my opinion. So I've got all the stats there, as you guys can see, but I'm just going to touch on Garchomp here. So this one with a Jolly Nature will hit 169. With an Adamant Nature, it will hit 154, right? If it does decide to hold a Choice Scarf, which not super uncommon for Pokemon in this speed tier, they will hit, a maximum of 231. In order to outspeed that in Tailwind, you need 116. And essentially, you'll be able to outspeed everything in the metagame with Tailwind or a Choice Scarf, which is very important to keep in mind. And because of that, running attack boosting natures is very common for these Pokemon. Now, important things to consider for this speed tier. If you are trying to outspeed base 100s, as I just said, throw the extra 2 points on, outspeed Garchomp. Hydreigon is another pretty common Pokemon in a relative speed tier here. It does have base 98. And it can hit 165 with a Timid Nature. So Pokemon like Tauros will commonly run Jolly max speed because it's a very good matchup for them. It enables them to basically click close combat into them if they don't Terra. If they Terra Steel, you can still close combat. And if they Terra Fire, it allows you to Wave Crash. So keep that in mind. Banded Hisuian Arcanine can run Jolly and hit 156. So if your base 100 Pokemon really needs to have a matchup into that, for example, your Garchomp, you might want to consider a speed boosting nature and then hitting that 156 speed tier, or at least 157 to outspeed it. And Jolly Scarf and Eyelap will hit 234, which I do kind of touch on in the next slide here, which is that Tailwind slide. This is basically just the important things to keep out for, keep an eye on, when you're running a Tailwind team. As we said, Dragapult 107, very important to keep an eye out for. If you, for whatever reason, cannot run that much speed, do keep an eye on things like Talonflame at 98, Meowscarada at 97. And of course, if you are running a bunch of the mid-speed tier Pokemon, which we'll kind of touch on briefly, 85 is your best friend, because with 85, it's very minimal speed investment for these Pokemon like Incineroar, and it also guarantees you to outspeed Pokemon like Garchomp in Tailwind as well, which I do think is pretty important. Some of the common, Toy Scarf Pokemon as well. We have Hisuian Typhlosion. Majority of the time, they'll run a Modest Nature, and because of that, hitting 111 will allow you to outspeed it in Tailwind. And Choice Scarf, Jolly, Annihilate. This tends to be like the final Gambit stuff. They hit 118 speed, so again, keep that in mind. And then finally, we have Blood Moon Ursaluna. Again, this Pokemon we'll touch on a bit later as well, but I do think it's very important to keep in mind if you're playing a Tailwind team. This is very important for Pokemon like Rillaboom, where if you are playing them in Tailwind and they're more of a middling speed tier Pokemon, sometimes hitting 115 can be very important to allow you to outspeed and, basically do a lot of damage to, Blood Moon Ursalunas if they are running the Timid Max Speed set. So now we have just some of the bigger threats that you have to watch out for here. We have Golden Go. Sometimes they'll hit, Timid Max Speed here, which hits 149. I do have Max Speed Jolly written there. That's meant to say Max Speed Modest will be 139. This is important to keep in mind for our next guy here, which is Amoonguss, right? So Amoonguss with the Timid Nature will hit 139, which does just outspeed those Modest Golden Goes. But Amoonguss is a Pokemon as well that does function in Trick Room that can hit a minimum speed of 72. And yeah, it can function in both Tailwind and Trick Room. Could also just function as a standalone Pokemon outside of both, so keep that in mind. Then we have the slow mid tier, which I kind of touched on just before. This is basically Pokemon in that speed tier of 60 to 66. I did originally have 65, but Skeledirge does have 66 base speed, and it kind of fits in here as well. But yeah, these Pokemon can run a little bit of speed investment, hitting 85 speed to outspeed those base 100s and 102s. Basically what I just touched on with the Garchomp stuff. Pelipper is a Pokemon in this speed tier that can run max with Focus Sash, hitting 128 speed with a Timid Nature. And these Pokemon will hit between 123 to 129 with max speed plus a speed boosting nature. Very important to keep an eye out for stuff like this as well, because we have seen in the past Pokemon like Incineroar run Jolly max speed just so they, they get those fast knockoffs, fake outs, all that kind of stuff, right? Parting shots as well. And something to keep in mind as well here is the base 60s can hit a minimum speed of 58. This is for Trick Room. This is normally for Pokemon like Porygon 2. Here is just a list of Pokemon that basically fall into that base 60 to 66 speed tier that we just touched on. These are Pokemon like Weezing, Sylveon, Primarina, Porygon 2, Incineroar, Hisuian Goodra, Farigiraf, Hisuian Decidueye, Clefable, Tyranitar, Pelipper, Hisuian, Braviary, and Skeledirge. Now, here are some of the important Trick Room threats as well. Now, something to keep in mind with these Trick Room Pokemon here is a majority of the time, you're never really going to calc to try to underspeed these Pokemon unless you're using something like Amoonguss, which we will kind of touch on shortly. But yeah, these are some of the bigger Pokemon that I think you will see that will run minimum speed. And definitely good to just know the numbers. So, Arachnid will hit 42, Torkoal 22, Dusclops 27, Hat 30, Snorlax 31, Conk and Eggy both 45, and then the base 50 speed tier is 49. Which again, we will touch on shortly with one Pokemon in particular. So then we have everyone's favorite guy here, Blood Moon Ursaluna. I've got something written here, having that base 52 speed makes it one of the most devastating Trick Room sweepers in the game. But, its Timid max speed set does hit 114. And again, its minimum speed can be 51. So this is definitely one of the biggest offensive threats in the game. It has a lot of power. And it's definitely something to keep in mind. If you're playing a Trick Room team or you have things like, for example, you're on Amoonguss and you're worried about a Trick Room Blood Moon Ursaluna, yeah, you might want to make sure it's, slower than 50 base speed just so you can make sure you get those spores off. And same thing with Pokemon like Rillaboom, right? The last thing you want is a Blood Moon Ursaluna just outspeeding you and just one-tapping with like a Blood Moon. So it definitely is something worth keeping in mind there. Then we have the regular form of Ursaluna. Again, very similar speed tier. It has base 50 speed, making it a very devastating Trick Room sweeper. A Jolly max speed set on this guy will hit 112. And a Brave min speed set will hit 49. So something to keep in mind there as well for both Trick Room and Tailwind. Amoonguss, I've got this guy here. You might see it run 0 speed IVs to underspeed Trick Room teams. Amoonguss is obviously a fantastic support Pokemon. We're seeing it a lot on Rain right now. And it can be a very good way at helping you deal with some of these Trick Room teams because, again, when you're running a super offensive team, sometimes you just bring in your Gus, your redirection bot, and you just start putting everything to sleep. It's fantastic as well into a lot of these teams as well that like to lead in a setup Trick Room because you can just start sporing stuff straight away. So very good Pokemon. And yeah, that's basically it for all of the important speed tiers, I guess, guys. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you made it to the end of the video. And I guess as well, guys, let me know down below. Do you guys think I missed anything important here? I do believe I covered basically everything, at least that I think is important to keep an eye on for now. I may even make an updated version of this in the next month or so as well if we do see, a bit of a change to the metagame. And maybe as things develop, my opinions on certain Pokemon will change and warrant a new list. But anyway, guys, thank you for making it to the end of the video. I do appreciate it. Yeah, if you could like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It would mean the world to me. And yeah, catch you guys in the next one. Peace.